tonight. Hopefully it didn't feel too challenging this morning. Going to challenge you a little bit more tonight, but I also feel like my messages tonight and tomorrow, I want to relieve a little bit of the pressure maybe I put on your shoulders this morning, because it's not all about us. We are a piece of what God is doing in this world, and so we just need to know our place in that. And this morning we talked about being God's light in the world, and about coming alongside His heart for the lost. And the foundation of that call, that ministry that all of us have, has to be worship. Worship in all senses of the word, worship of what we just did right now, worship what we're doing right now even as we're learning and exploring. Worship is what we do through all of our lives. As He transforms us personally, through that then we are able to change the world. And I reflected on this a lot, and as I talked about in my journey, I originally was struck with, okay, this is my purpose in this world, is to be God's light to the nations. But through that, I found, after some time wrestling through that and living that out, I found that there was something a little bit lacking in that. And my mind even went to some what-if scenarios, which aren't always the best, but my mind went there anyways. So I wondered, what if I was stuck on a desert island? What then? Like if I am, Tom Hanks status in Castaway, and I'm on that island, it's me and Wilson, like what then? Who am I supposed to share the light to? I'm not going to convince Wilson to become a follower of Jesus. It's going to just be me there. Is my hope that one day I make it out of that island back to society that I can then make a difference? Or is there a purpose even in my life in that moment when it's just me? Maybe for us, we're not probably ever going to be, hopefully, stuck on a desert island. But, what if you're stuck in bed sick for a week? Is your only hope that, next week you'll get better and so that you can go back to be a, productive member of society? Or does God have something for you even in those moments? I think there is something in those moments. I think that something is worship. As we come to worship Him in our moments and all that we do, there's incredible purpose, I think, to be found in it. And I think our ultimate purpose on this earth is to worship God. To be a light of the world is second. And they flow back and forth to support one another. But day to day, our purpose is in worship. If we do nothing in the single day, obviously we're going to do something throughout the day. We're going to get up and eat and whatnot. But if we do nothing else but worship God, it was a day worth living. And so I want to take a look quick at just a single verse, so I'll just read it to you. It's really short. You may have read Luke before in the Bible. You may have skipped over this verse because it's so short. But Luke 5:16 says, "He, on the other hand, used to retire to solitary places to pray." The He being Jesus. And if God Himself felt it worth of His time, His limited, short time on this earth, that He had 3 years worth of ministry, pretty much. If He felt it was worthwhile for those 3 years to spend some of that time not ministering to those around Him, but to withdraw and worship God, I think there's something for us to be learned in that. And there are many actions of Jesus in the Bible, but I think that action has such importance and significance for us. And in Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, it says in chapter 5, verse 17, it says, "Pray without ceasing." And I wonder how many of us are doing that in our lives. Anybody? Good, I like it. It's not a trick question. I think it's possible. I think that's something for us to attain. And it doesn't mean we don't go about living our day. Doesn't mean like every single moment I'm like, like this, praying to God like a monk status. But I think there is a call for us to pray. And I think prayer is worship. It's a part of our worship. And so throughout our day, if we are worshiping Him, that's God's call. And I feel like a lot of times we speak of it as, or even in the Bible, it's translated as like to pray, or we pray to God. And I feel like part of that, like pray without ceasing, is it's not just something we're speaking to Him. It's a conversation. I think we should be praying with God. We're partnering with Him in the ministry He does. We're partnering with Him in our jobs, in our workplaces, in our lives. And so throughout the day, our praying without ceasing is really just a conversation that's ongoing with Him. It means, when I go out that door of my room or my house in the morning, I'm continuing to consider Him and what He might have for me to do. It means, I'm encouraging my coworker. It means I'm looking out for other people. It means I'm open. And it means I'm considering Him with gratitude and thankfulness. And I have two very important relationships in my life. One is God. One is my wife. And for any really serious relationship to work, people talk about marriage, and the key to marriage is good communication. But something like we don't have to work at is, we were out for the day or we were working, whatever, and I come home, it's naturally going to be like, how was your day? What happened with your day? Like, what did you do? What was in it? What is exciting? What were your struggles? What were your successes? And our relationship with God has to be the same way. If we're not having that communication with Him, it's not going to grow stronger. But if we do have that communication, it's going to grow and it's going to blossom, and we're going to get to know more of His heart. So, I talked a little bit about prayer being worship, but I want to define worship a little bit because it's a very churchy word, and maybe you've been spent your whole life in the church, but you don't entirely know what it is. The definition of worship comes from ascribing worth to something. So we're giving worth to God is our worship. We're saying He deserves something from us because of who He is, because of what He's done. Now for all of us, one of the big things is He sent Jesus to us, but every day He's doing stuff for us. So I think there's two pieces to worship. One definition, is it's a response to God for what He's done. We're talking to Him, we're communing with Him, we're singing songs to Him, and all that is because of what He has done for us and is continuing to do for us each day of our lives. And the other part of it is any act that glorifies God. So it's our response to God, and it's any act that glorifies Him. And I think something super central to kind of the conversation of this whole weekend, there's a famous quote by a guy named John Piper. You might have heard of him. And the quote says, "Missions is not the goal of the church, worship is." I'll say that one more time. Missions is not the goal of the church, worship is. The goal of the church is for the entire world to be worshiping God. And the beauty of that is it flows back and forth. Because as we worship God and spend time with Him, we become more like Him and we get to know His heart. And His heart is for the lost sheep. His heart is for the world to know Him. And so out of our worship, our missions, our ministry, to be a light to the world flows. And it's just a cycle that fuels itself and fuels our life. But if we don't have worship as the center of it, we're going to get burned out, we're going to get tired, and it's not going to go well because we're not going to even know who God is that we're supposed to be representing and sharing His light. So I want to take a moment and look at 1 Thessalonians 4, 9 through 12. It says, "Now concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all the brothers throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more, and to aspire to live quietly, and to mind your own affairs, and to work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. And as I read through that, I was very much struck by that phrase in verse 11. It says, aspire to live quietly and mind your own affairs. I was like, that's random. The guy writing this certainly did not live his life that way. So why is he including that? And as I began to process through that, I felt like God was sharing with me this idea of our lives to be a good representation to the world. And even as I was talking earlier and sharing with you those words God gave me of loving loudly, I think we need to do that in the right context. And so by living quietly, I think we can be a good representation to Him to this world. And I like to look at it kind of this way. If we can be quietly screaming the gospel to the world. Because there's a lot of things gathering attention from people all around. And if we're just another voice, like on the street corner or in the office or whatever it is, yelling at them, like loudly, like everything else, it's not going to be heard. But if we are characterized by love, and we can quietly scream to them the gospel through our love and our actions, and our words and everything else that we're characterized by, I think that's God's call for our lives. And throughout my life, I've considered the question of what it really means to serve God. I've wondered and wrestled with, keeping me up at night, like, am I truly 100% serving Him? Like, what if I truly believed the gospel and was 100% sold out? What would my life look like? Would it look like how my life is right now? Or would it look different? And I think it's really important. But I wondered, what does it mean to truly preach and live the gospel? And there are so many different interpretations of it. You can find tons of books, written on how to live your life and what it should look like. But I wondered, do I live just a normal life? Going to church, being a good representation in my job, whatever it is, or do I sell it all and go and serve Him? And I read books by David Platt called Radical. That's pretty much that. Give it all up, all your worldly possessions, your job, everything. And I heard from other people that were saying, no, it's fine, just live a radically normal life that points people towards God. And I think there's value in both of those. But I don't think it's one or the other. I think we need to live a little bit more radically and a little bit more sold out for God. But I don't think that means we give up, all of our normal lives. None of you, I don't think, probably, maybe one of you, but probably none of you, need to quit your jobs on Monday. That's not God's call, and to go serve the poor. And I've been on both sides of that. But I feel like we can't simplify the gospel and the calling for rigorous discipleship and ministry. That's the heart of the gospel. And it's challenging, it's hard, it's not easy. And that's what Christ's call is for us. It's daunting, honestly, at times. But that's why God gives us grace. That's why God gives us the Holy Spirit to help us. That's why He gives us community to encourage us and support us in all things. And I believe I think one important part of God's call for our lives and our call to worship Him is sanctification, which our great brother in the front here talked about with some of you even this morning. But I wonder, how many of you changed your actions and character this week at all? How many of you were impacted by your relationship with God and let Him change you to become more like Jesus? We can't just be passive in this world, letting the world go by us. God calls us to know Him more and become more and more like Him. And through that, we can live lives that are quietly screaming the gospel to this world. And I feel this is what the apostles did in the New Testament. They lived lives that undeniably pointed towards God. There were still plenty of people in the world around them that rejected Christ, but everywhere they went, people were confronted with God. They were confronted with the gospel. They were leading lives that greatly impacted their communities and the way they operated. Christians were making such an impact on society that the government had to change the way they were operating to change face. The Christians were loving their neighbors so much that they were putting the government to shame because the government wasn't taking care of its own citizens, but the Christians were. And so the government started persecuting the Christians because they said, "You're making us look bad." And that's still a call for us today. We are supposed to be living and loving our neighbors. We're supposed to be letting God change us and sanctify us every day. That word just means becoming more like Christ. That's sanctification. So I want to give a simple scenario for you. It's Monday morning. You're getting a cup of coffee with your coworker at work, and they ask you, because you're standing there together, getting a cup of coffee, and they ask you, how was your weekend? Now, what's your response to that? Is it, it was good? And then your coworker goes, "Oh, great, what did you do?" And you're like, "I went up to Santa Cruz." Your coworker goes, "Oh, great, that's awesome. Santa Cruz is fun. What did you do in Santa Cruz?" "Well, I went to this kind of retreat place with some friends." "Oh, really? Where'd you go? What did you do?" "Oh, well, I went with some Christians from my church, and we started, just kind of exploring and learning more about God together." How was your weekend? That conversation, it can go that way. But it can go totally different too. It can go, "How was your weekend?" "It was awesome. I got to go up to Santa Cruz with a bunch of friends, and we, explored faith and learned more about God and just had a really good time together." And I guarantee you, your coworker's not going to think you're crazy for saying that. They're going to probably be a little bit jealous. Because their weekend was probably not that good. But we have opportunities around us always to share God's love and to give glory to Him. That's worship. That conversation is worship of God because we gave glory to Him. Because we shared His love with the world around us. Maybe I don't even get to impact somebody, but I went through my day and it was a long day at work and I'm driving home and I see a beautiful sunset. And I can thank God because He created that. And He's an artist and He's amazing. And in that, I get to be thankful and give glory to Him. It was a worthwhile day because I got to thank Him. I get to see His creation. So worship has two primary components, like I said. It's giving glory to God and it's serving Him. And it involves the time we spend with God, doing things for God or because of Him. And in other words, it means receiving God's love for us and turning around and loving Him and the world in return. And we need to get both of these things right if we're to have a healthy relationship with Him. Similar to human marriage, great love requires give and take from both of us in our relationship. And I can't only receive from God. Just like I can't only receive from my wife. It wouldn't be a healthy relationship. I need to give to her, and there's seasons I need to take from her. Our relationship with God's the same way. There are times where I need to just go to church or have a friend pray for me or whatever it is, that I need to just sit at the feet of God and receive from Him. But I also need to spread that love out too, otherwise it's not a healthy relationship.
That's right.
Our time with God includes time we spend learning about Him. It includes time in prayer, time singing, listening, reading the Bible, enjoying God's creation. It includes fellowship with other believers, enjoying a sunset, flavors of food, creation, worshiping God through time. In all these things, we can see God at work and how He's serving us. But we also need to serve Him. Despite trends in even our community or our world towards social justice, there's more to be done. We need to be His light in this world. So I want to take a look at Luke 10:38 through 42, which is a very famous passage that honestly at times I've gotten sick of people talking about. But I think it's talked about so much because it's important. Does somebody want to read it for us? Luke 10:38 through 42.
Now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his words. And Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me." And Jesus answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her."
So like I said, there was a while where I kind of got sick of this passage. But I think part of that was I never truly understood it. And I understood a piece of it. Matter of fact, before I left for Costa Rica, I got my undergrad in biblical studies, and I went to seminary and got my master in divinity to be a pastor. And then there's a longer story there, but the short of it is, after all that, I ended up working for a company in sales and maintenance. I was fixing industrial dishwashers just like that one in restaurants around Los Angeles, which I wasn't super excited about. I'm like, this is not what I went to school for. This is not what I sacrificed all my time and money and dreams for, God. But in that, I learned many different things. And one of the things I learned one of the things I was tempted with was kind of the success of that career. Because it was, I had opportunity to get promoted and go up, and I was ranked number 1 nationally for sales in that company. And I was tempted to just keep going on that trajectory. And I was confronted though also with the emptiness of that. Because I remember working, it's restaurants or dishwasher. If it goes down on Friday night at 11 o'clock, they want somebody to come and fix it because they got a lot of dishes to do. And so, we would work sometimes 50, 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. And I remember one of those weeks just being towards the end of the week, because we'd rotate who had to be on call late at night. And I remember being at the end of one of those weeks, and I had gotten home from the end of a long day work, and you got a phone that could ring at any moment, but you're getting ready to it's late enough, I think I'm good, I can get into bed and get a little bit of sleep, and the phone rings and I have to go out. So I get back out and go to this restaurant, and I'm fixing their dishwasher, and I'm on the floor, and it's wet and it's hot, and dishwashers are mad because they want to go home but they can't wash the dishes and they're piled up, and I'm there and like I'm just tired and there's like it smells, there's it's dirty under a restaurant dishwasher, it's not clean. And I'm there and I'm like I'm so tired, I can't even get this bolt off, like I just want to go home. Like where is God in this? Where's my purpose in this? And in that is where I started to form my theology of, okay, if I'm worshiping God, there's purpose. But I had to see even the other side of it before I truly could get that. I had to see both the Mary and the Martha side, and it wasn't like just selfish by any means, because we would have taken an easier way that my wife and I went to Costa Rica. There was definitely easier things to do after you get married, but going down there, we left it all. Talking about even those two sides of like living a radical life. Like I've given it all up and went. And that's the calling of some people. That was the calling of us for a season. But it's neither of those is fully the answer. And I was confronted in that there were weeks that were dry, and serving all the time and being a light to those around us all the time isn't enough. And I think in the scene that Luke set up in Luke 10 of the two sisters, they respond differently to Jesus, and I think neither response is always the right one. It's a situational thing. For this situation, Martha was wrong and Mary was correct in her response to Jesus. And there's two sides of that kind of are, Martha was doing all these things for Jesus, and Mary was being discipled by him. And in our lives, we need to have both of those things in balance. It's not one or the other. We need to be discipled. We need to become more like Jesus in our lives. We need to spend time. We need to worship him. We also need to serve him with our lives. And the end result is, for Mary even, who was being discipled by Jesus, is that she's going to be called to sacrificially serve others. And you can't make an end run for the finish line by skipping discipleship through your time with God. You can't just get to the service piece and miss the discipleship piece. It doesn't work that way. Your time with God is super important. Your worship of him is super important. And we need to seek a balance between our calling to worship God and to serve him. And the moment we get so caught up in the service that we leave God out of the picture, we turn into Martha. The moment we get so caught up in worship and discipleship that we lose service, that's not healthy either. And a healthy relationship has that balance of both of those pieces. And the only way you can know the difference of what you're supposed to do is by seeking God and letting him answer it for you. It's not the same for each person in this room. It's not the same for each situation as you go through your day. We need to humbly become before him, and he will show us. In this story, I see so many reactions. I see reactions from both of them. And I see in Martha just a pride, that she was prideful of her home and her service and what she wanted to do for him. And she was so full of herself that she didn't even just pull her sister aside. She went right to Jesus. It was her sister. She could have had a conversation like, hey, I need help. Like, it's busy. There's a lot of people in our house. Like, help me. But no, she like goes and just complains to Jesus, like, why are you not berating my sister for what she's doing? And I believe this story shows that discipleship has to take priority to service. And I don't say that to say like discipleship, or service takes a back seat. Our call to be a light takes a back seat. But if we prioritize discipleship, we will also prioritize being a light. Because you can't be discipled and not have God call you to be a light to this world. The more we get to know his heart, the more we see his heart for the lost sheep of this world, and we have to go out and do something about it and live our lives for it. During a trip back to the U.S. when we were in Costa Rica, I found myself sitting in one of the biggest churches in the U.S. And in that, the pastor was talking about purpose a little bit. Actually, a famous pastor talking about purpose. And he said, if you don't have something worth fighting for in your life, you might as well die. And I thought that was a little extreme, and I was a little actually offended for some people that were there, because I thought our reason for living and your life is worthwhile if you have a relationship with God and are worshiping Him with your life. That's the good news. That's even when I talked about it at the beginning. That's the free news. I challenged you this morning. I'm still challenging you a little bit tonight. But to me, there's rest in that. Because I don't always succeed at everything, but if I can at least worship God a little bit throughout my day, or by the end of the day, I know that my life is worthwhile and it's worth living, and I'm doing something worthy. And, I was talking when I was in that job fixing dishwashers, and I learned through that to find purpose in my work. I learned that there was purpose in worship throughout my day. I could offer prayers as I was driving stuck in LA traffic. I could be thankful for the things that God had given me each day. I could encourage people as I encounter them throughout the day. Or maybe I was just serving my customers well, and in that glorifying God for a job well done. And I think that's something for each of us. We all have jobs. We're all young professionals. That's why we're here. That's in our name. And you can glorify God. You can worship Him each day in your job. And I think as we begin to realign our priorities, there's some freedom that comes with that. There's some hope. Because I think sometimes too, we feel guilty because our lives seem consumed by all these things, or we feel like, should I be spending money on this thing and not giving it to the poor, or I'm going out to a really nice meal, is that appropriate, or I'm getting this thing. And as Christians, we need to be more generous by all means, with our finances, with our resources, with our time, all sorts of things. And there's things that sometimes we do need to cut out. I know when I was younger, I have a lack of self-control, so I had to cut video games out of my life. Because I just can't put it down. So I had to say 0. But I don't think we need to cut everything. We don't, as Christians, need to renounce all worldly pleasures in this world. And worshiping God doesn't mean we have to give everything up. And I think it's a chance for us as Christians even to be seen in this world as redeeming certain things, like sharing good food and drink and enjoying that. There's glory and worship of God to be found even in something like that. More so than if I give $9 to the poor and eat $1 on beans and rice for dinner and eat it with an unhappy, begrudging heart. There is much more glory to be found in God if I'm thankful for what He's given me. That doesn't mean I'm not supposed to help the poor and feed those that are hungry and in need. But we have a chance to worship through everything that we do. And so as I finish up, I just want to read Psalm 51:17. It says, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." I'll read that one more time. It says, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." And, this is speaking to the Jewish people before they had even known their Savior. And they were stuck in a sacrificial system. But their sacrifices were a worship to God, and they served two purposes. The first was to offer a substitute for sin for them. And the second was an outward expression of their repentance for what they had done. But the real goal for God was their heart. That's what He cared about. That's what He cares about for each of us. And we live in the post-Jesus Christ era, which means we get a fuller glimpse of who God is. And our sacrifice for our sin has already been offered. Unlike the Israelites, Jesus hadn't come yet. But for us, Jesus already came. The sacrifice for the things we've screwed up in this life, it already happened. We already accepted that. But we still have something to offer God, though, and that's our hearts. the Bible itself is one big, long story about God seeking to have a relationship with us and with humanity. And God doesn't want our work, or I should say at least He doesn't want only our work, our sacrifice, our money. These are all things that get offered to Him as a part of our relationship with Him. But what God ultimately wants from each of us is our hearts. He wants our worship. And through that, that's our purpose, ultimately. If we're worshiping Him, that's our purpose. Love in and through worship is purpose. And for each of us, I think that's the message I want to leave us with tonight, is you have a purpose. And your purpose is the two things we've talked about so far today. Worship God, love loudly with your lives. So I think, you want to break into groups again?
Yeah, you want to pick the small groups? So you guys remember who's your small group leader?